while we're waiting for more friends to join, I want to give a shout out to the MedEd webinar series that we're doing with some group from ATS. This September, we had How to Get a MedEd Grant, moderated by Yuri Matsurov, and our panelists who all are very knowledgeable. Also, in October, we had How to Conduct a Needs Assessment for a MedEd Grant Application by Justin Lee and our friends from University of Kansas, Nancy and Tessa. If you guys want to see them, please visit the Assembly's Journal Club. Here's the direction. And we also have some other webinars in December, how to publish, January, types of MedEd studies, February, getting credit, and all the other ones that are coming along nicely if people want to join or see them later. So, hello everyone, my name is Rodolfo Alpizar-Rivas. I am an assistant professor at Wake Forest University. Although I actually work in Milwaukee, St. Luke's Hospital, I attend both as transplant infectious diseases and a critical care physician. But on my free time, I chair one of the ATS education pods where we geek out about all things that are about adult learning. This whole idea to impact adventure started exactly where most mischiefs in MedEd begins. It was a casual pod conversation about how we are great at brainstorming projects, but not so great at actually shepherding them to publication. So I was discussing with my partner in crime, Dr. Jain. He's not only a pulmonary critical care fellow at the University of Oklahoma, but he held editorial fellowships at both AMA and BMG. So let's just say that Bean knows a thing or two. So knowing that we needed some firepower, we brought on Dr. Heath Patel over at UVA, where he's a pulmonary critical care extraordinaire, advocates for ICU learners while being an occasional warrior against CLAPSIS. If anyone knows how to keep an ambitious meta project on track, and the researcher saying is Heath. But Heath said to me, I got a friend who needs to be in this table, and that's how we got Dr. Erin Camac. Erin brings in a powerhouse CB. She is the program director at Kentucky Pulmonary and Critical Care Fellowship, runs the ILD clinic, and is chair-elect of the Working Medical and Science Committee. If you want to talk about mentorship or medical education, Erin gets it done. So we all roll up our sleeves, we put our heads together, and here we are, ready to share how to get great ideas to real impact. Sometimes a little chaos, sometimes some collaboration along the way. But thank you everyone for joining us. We will be discussing these questions that we pre-agreed on, and it'll be a more conversational discussion than a lecture. Without further to add, I'll let Heath Patel start with my first question. So, Heath, how do you recognize when a teaching activity, curriculum, or quality improvement project has the potential to become a scholarship, and how do you frame it into a publishable question?
Rodolfo, that's I think a question that we all struggle with, but I think it really boils down to is recognizing that we are doing work every day, teaching, mentoring, and developing curricula that has value beyond your own setting, especially if you take the time to set it up in a systematic format. So the key question I always try to ask myself is about all the projects that I'm doing is what can others learn from this? And if the answer is something meaningful, then that's how you know that you can take that into scholarship. One of the projects that I did as a fellow at UNC was related to burnout in MICU house staff, so their experience of burnout in the ICU. And that project started with informal reflections, hallway conversations about how hard but meaningful MICU rotations can be. When we began asking why the rotation felt that way and then collected those reflections in a systematic and rigorous way, that's really when our work shifted. what we were seeing was not only our story, it reflected the experience of trainees in MICUs across the country that share similar structures and pressures. So your first step should always be to ask, what can others learn from this? And if it's something meaningful, then you have a project worth sharing and that is scholarship or scholarly worthy.
I love that you made a tightrope on this slide, Heath, because really it emphasizes how it feels to be trying to build something new. And you're kind of workshopping it with the people around you. You're like, does this seem crazy or does it seem great? And, you know, before you're stepping out onto that tightrope, you're really asking, like, what could I potentially be building here? But you're also having precarity, which is just so well expressed by that slide.
And I think there's a therapeutic part to it when you realize that the generalizability, I don't know if that's a word, but that
Yeah.
a lot of people in other institutions are going through what you are going, and the things that you're doing may help them. So, how do you know if a project is big enough or novel enough to merit a publication?
So similarly to the first question, Rodolfo, I think every one of us has had a moment where they wonder if their project is too small, or has it already been done, or has somebody done it better? And we always worry because we're trained in the scientific literature to always be thinking about randomized controlled trials, multi-center, etc. And that's what the hallmark of rigor looks like. But for medical education and reality, journals are not looking for huge projects. Although if you do a huge one, that's awesome. And if you make a project go from single center to multi-center, that definitely increases the rigor. But that's not necessary. What they're really looking for is three things, which are achievable even in smaller projects. So clear alignment with a gap in the literature, that you did it in a meaningful way with rigor, and that it adds a contribution to the field. And so we often think that we have to come up with an idea or project that is entirely novel and new, but that's definitely not the case. Novelty often comes from the context that you may do a study or the application. And so two ways that I found really helpful to identify a gap is to already use the literature that's out there. If I read a really interesting MedEd study, the authors in their discussion section will often tell you exactly where the gaps in the literature are or what the next steps could be from their work. So using that as a starting point, you've already identified a gap. And so if the curricula that you're developing or the mentorship or the programs that you're creating already identify a gap, that is going to be scholarly. The other thing that I think about, in a second way I help identify gaps when I'm thinking about projects, is noticing what's missing from the conversation already. So one thing that I've been thinking about recently is, what are the skills and behaviors and the traits of excellent teaching faculty in the MICU setting specifically? And there's actually not a lot of robust literature there. But even if there was, you can make it novel. Let's say there was a study specifically looking at that in the MICU setting. You could look to see, is there literature in the CICU setting if you're a cardiac intensivist? Is there literature in the SICU setting? And the other way you could think about applying a novel project is thinking about the learners that have been studied as well. So oftentimes, for many of us who are pulmonary critical care in the MICU setting, many of the studies have been done predominantly on IM learners, right? And we have other learners that rotate with us in the MICU, and their experiences are important too. So many times you can take a twist on something that's already done, dig deeper, and still find important findings that can help our learners and move forward the way that we train the next generation of physicians.
I even like the idea you've just come up with as an example, Heath. There are so many different ways you could approach that project depending upon your bandwidth and the people around you who might want to do the project with you. Like maybe you have access to an institutional med hub system by which one could source information about like what words are associated with the best Likert scores for faculty in intensive care settings across my whole university, you know. Or you could do one of those wonderful kind of Delphi type group settings where you work with a bunch of fellows to kind of get them to talk together about what makes an ideal faculty member, and then in a scholarly way present that. So I just like how adaptable each one of these little gems is and how many different settings that gem can fit into.
Exactly, Erin. I think, one thing that we don't always think about is digging deeper. And so each of those are studies, right? So an ideal MICU educator, or let's say an ideal cardiothoracic ICU educator may look different based on their setting, their context, and also by the learner, just like you're saying. So a fellow may want slightly different traits from a MICU attending versus a resident, versus even between that, a senior resident versus an intern. And so really digging deep into each of those populations makes it rigorous and novel, even though an analogous study may have been done in a similar population, but different.
Conversations just like this one are how that gets refined.
How about sizes? I always had that question because sometimes, for example, I was trying to develop a questionnaire for underrepresented minorities, and that from the get-go gets you small sample sizes. You can have, depending on how big your hospital is on your IM program, 10 or 20 people that identify as a minority. How do you know if your numbers are big enough for a project?
Yeah, Rodolfo. So, I think again, it's quality over quantity, and we are all limited in our resources as medical educators because we're often not getting funded for this work, as we know, and it's sweat equity. So I do think, if you can, to go a little bit against what I said earlier, getting a collaborator in another institution to kind of diversify the pool is always helpful. If that's not feasible, then you can you can lean on methodology, right? So that would be a great place where qualitative methodology may be great because you could probably hit thematic saturation and get a really robust and hypothesis generating findings from that group. And really also at the same time, that when you do a qualitative study that is deeply informative of what is kind of the perception, depending on your clinical question at your institution, to help improve the learner environment.
Rodolfo, we can.
Yep.
There you go.
What simple evaluation strategies and outcomes can you build into a curriculum from the start so it's polishable later?
Well, Rodolfo, I think, evaluation is a scary word. I think that's a place that we often get stuck. But really, evaluation is what transforms teaching into evidence. People often think evaluation needs to be complex, but it doesn't. The first question that I like to ask myself is, what would meaningful change look like? And once you answer that, the evaluation plan becomes much simpler. Kirkpatrick's model is a helpful guide, which is what's on this slide. And as we know, many projects stop at level one, which is satisfaction. This is useful, but not enough for scholarship. So if you move even one level higher, such as measuring knowledge or assessing skills, such as a brief checklist and a simulation, you can create publishable outcomes without adding much work, especially if you're rigorous and intentional in the development of your assessment tool or use a pre-existing validated instrument. You can also choose small but meaningful behavior outcomes. For example, a chart audit of whether residents documented ventilator settings correctly after you provide a curriculum on that to them. Or do you actually see learners use a structured rounding tool in the ICU that you've implemented? So those simple measures show real impact, and they're helping to measure the exact behaviors you're hoping the learners go on to enact after your curriculum. One other really important thing I think is looping in the IRB early, and that has been for me personally a great place where AI can be helpful and really decrease the amount of time that it takes to complete IRBs. I think the big point from my perspective is that all of this takes pre-planning. It doesn't take a lot of pre-planning, but we often are on tight deadlines and rushing to action and implementation of curricula or teaching. So it does take a little bit of time ahead of time to be intentional and sit down and think about how you're going to evaluate and what would meaningful change look like.
And bringing other people in on this process rather than doing it by yourself between the walls of your own brain, I think the thing I I appreciate the most about the Kirkpatrick levels is that it stimulates conversation among collaborators to develop a better project, a more impactful project.
So we're going to start by ignoring step 1 then.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. So then let's talk about building the scholarly process. Sorry. How do early career educators balance feasibility with rigor so projects don't get stalled?
Oh, yeah. We're always looking for that sweet spot right in the middle and between all of these important goals. But I wanted to provide you some tips from my own experience. So we could go forward one. We'll look at some of those tips. You as an educator need a mentor, no matter what level you're at. Even if you're a full professor, you still need a mentor. And that mentor can't be the person who mentors your research project as a leader, right? So if you're coming into a research project that you are not leading or that you're leading and the mentor who's mentoring you through that project is also your personal mentor, you're missing out on an opportunity because you need your personal mentor to help your research mentor and you figure things out in a way that supports you too. And I think I see Vin up there shaking his head from the fellow perspective, right? Like it's very easy for you and your research mentor to figure something out together that fits the research mentor's obligations much better than it fits your obligations as a junior educator who still needs support. So I really can't say enough about the value of a separate personal mentor who doesn't do research with you, who can say, is that project really a good fit for you? Like, I know it's really rigorous and it's really impactful, but it is feasible for you to do, for example, during your fellowship. I don't know. Also, I see a lot of young medical educators bang their heads against the wall because they think that if their mentor has given them this idea kernel, that idea has been fully vetted and is ready for action, that there's been a lit review about it, that this person is giving you something that is totally mature and ready for prime time. And the truth is, unfortunately, mentors love to share ideas, and those ideas are generally kind of run through a cycle of the N of one of their own head, when what it needs to be is vetted by a group that has experience in medical education who can help you to develop the project in a way that is suitable and high impact and that is consistent with the literature and the gaps in literature that Heath mentioned earlier. So my advice, if you're going to take on a MedEd project, there should be at least 2 leaders, an experienced or senior leader who's like ready to step into the leadership role and a really very experienced leader who can sort of globally guide. You need a couple of learners on every project so that they can help move it forward and get the experience that they need to transition into those leadership roles. I really think there's got to be an internal evaluator who's going to edit your project for you before it goes to the actual editors at the journal, who are going to say something to you that will make you say, don't. And you need a statistician, especially if you're doing something that is very methodologically rigorous, to know whether or not you have, for example, power analysis before something begins that suggests that it will be large enough data set that you can achieve to reach your goal. And just a note that we all overestimate our bandwidth. So I tend to advise, and I'm curious what you advise, Heath and Rodolfo, a 20% reduction from what you think you can do as a bare minimum. I think I can recruit 400 people for this. Can we at least go 20% below that? And are we still in the realm of reason even after we do? So just some pearls.
Hey, Erin, I can't agree with you enough. Past you or present you always thinks that future you is going to be able to do more than you can do, both in terms of I think sometimes the rigor of what you can do and what's available to you at your institution, but also just your own time constraints. So we've talked about, if we're going to talk about the Eisenhower matrix, most of this med ed work sits in important, but not urgent necessarily. Nobody's holding your feet to the fire to get these things done or published often. And so it's really easy to think you're going to get more done than you're going to, and to give yourself some grace and kind of scale that down. I also think, really important to your second point here is a lit review has never been easier, right? Again, promoting AI, right? We have lots of tools that can now help decrease that time it takes to look at the literature and fact check folks. Never been a better time to be thinking about scholarship and publication in MedEd.
So this is the ideally, but for example, you come from a community hospital, you may not have a statistician. Which ones of these projects should be a must?
Cool. I think the must is the mentorship. You need an experienced leader to help you mentor you through the project, who's not like tied to the success of the project, but is tied to your success. That's the most important thing.
I like that. That's so nice.
Yeah, so there are a lot of resources. I just wanted to add a few things in here that folks may not know are out there, but that are super high yield. So we all know that we have a very high impact journal, the Journal of Graduate Medical Education, that publishes a lot of really important MedEd work. Did you know that they have a whole page that's under guidelines for peer reviewers that basically tells you, the author, how to get through peer review? So reading that document can really help you to see what they're looking for when they're evaluating your manuscript. And if you know that ahead, it's like having cheat codes in a video game. There's also a lot of ATS scholar assets that we tend to forget are out there, not just the publications that we've made, like How I Review Medical Education Manuscript, which you should totally read if you have not read it, but also the editors and staff want you to succeed. This is a small community of people who all know one another and want to support medical education. So come on down and be like, hi, I want to create a thing for your journal. If it looked like this, what would you think? And if I changed to that, would it be better? We can have these conversations even via email before you submit anything at all. And then finally, if you're not a SOMI member, you should consider becoming a SOMI member, because that group is how so much gets done. Little pods are formed and working groups are formed that turn whatever their topic is into scholarship, and that happens every year. So if you want to be part of that, come show up at a SOMI meeting. You're going to be welcome. Oh yeah, and we have a podcast.
So how do you find mentors or collaborators in the pre-submission stage, especially if your institution lacks some strong meta infrastructure?
Oh yeah, that's what the national organizations are for. But as I've created this, I really put your personal mentor in the center, because these kind of options may not be individually relevant to you, and helping you figure out whether they are is an important role. But if you all are not quite so familiar with the graduate medical education side of things, we as pulmonary and critical care docs have the Association for Pulmonary and Critical Care Medicine program directors. They will submit, for example, vetted surveys to the entirety of the GME landscape of like all enrolled fellows in programs or all enrolled program directors in programs. That can be an extremely useful tool. Also, full of young educators interested in doing scholarly work and creating a venue in which scholarly work can be disseminated that you may not know is out there, that's separate from CHEST and ATS. The CHEST MedEd network is friendly. The ATS section on medical education is friendly. Just show up. Even if you don't get an invitation personally, no one needs you to be invited. You can just come. But I would argue that when you show up at that meeting, you should actually meet some people and maybe ask some questions and maybe make a suggestion. Maybe it'll be off the wall, but like maybe it won't be. And then I know Vin can talk a lot about journal editorial fellowships and the value that those have. There's a lot of positions like that have more trouble filling than you would think. So you could be a candidate for that. And then, of course, free and open medical education is a thing, and you should apply for you should apply for stuff, but you should also put stuff online. Hey, I'm thinking about doing a project on dot dot dot. Anybody want to collaborate on that? Love me. Hashtag ATS MedEd or hashtags ATS SOMI or whatever. You're going to get a bunch of responses. So I've added the comment apply for stuff because a lot of these organizations have a cycle, like annually, where ideas come up for discussion. They're sort of vetted through working groups. They make their way through scholarly work, and then the conference happens. Everybody gets to present their work, and then it kind of rolls around again. So the asterisk there is apply for stuff. And in order to do that, you really have to be aware of the calendar that each of these organizations is working by. So again, your friendly personal mentor should help to kind of direct you towards where to find that information so that you can get with the cycle of whichever organization you think might help.
Again, I 100% agree with Erin. Just doling out pearls and advice. I think one thing that I would add too is that locally, you may not have expertise within your division or department, but think about other departments, right? Just because you may not have someone who's doing a lot of education scholarship within your close-knit circle. Certainly, there's likely someone at your institution, for instance, pediatrics as a group in a department have often been at the forefront of a lot of MedEd literature. So there's probably somebody close by who can be that personal mentor, even if they may not be directly in your division or department.
Excellent point. And just a side note, almost all of those organizations have mentorship systems in play. So even if you didn't know where to go, just type in ATS and mentor, and some of the mentorship programs will pop in that you can apply for. And if you're an advanced educator and you're on this webinar or you're watching and you haven't signed up to be a mentor, please consider doing that, because as Heath was just mentioning, there are a lot of people whose institutions don't have the wealth of personal mentorship that they need to succeed.
So how can conferences, abstracts, poster, or workshops be used to test and refine ideas before a full manuscript preparation?
This is a leading question, but it's right though. The answer is that there are so many great people who are going to wander by and see the cool work that you've done and say, hey, I know Heath, and Heath is interested in this. Let me give you Heath's number, or his email address. And those little connections seem small at the time that they happen, but over your career, they add up to be extremely valuable. So one of the reasons I'm a medical educator at all is because this is a group of people who are supportive of one another and who care about one another and who want people who are coming up within the ranks of future educators to succeed. So this is what it's all about. This is how cross collaboration is made, and ATS sessions are created and scholarly work is disseminated. So not bringing something to conference that could have gone to conference is just a missed opportunity. A side note, I might have mentioned on a future slide, but conferences are for work in progress, not finished work. I know that's a weird thing to think about because it feels like having your own ATS presentation is like a fait accompli, but that is the work in progress stage where you are working with colleagues to generate something interesting, and you're hearing feedback from the community about how that interesting stuff could go. So that's where you should bring the stuff you're not done with. That's how to make it better.
Yeah, we can't say anything really additional to what Erin's saying there, but just to reiterate, I think many of us have found our tribe at these conferences, and like Erin is saying, you just got to make yourself a little uncomfortable, go up to people, say hi, start chatting about things. That's actually where Erin and I met, and as part of a pod meeting for SOMI, we actually all sat down and we had 6 pulmonary and critical care doctors reminiscing about COVID-19, and ultimately we hatched a plan to each of us to write a short 100-word piece of fiction which we ultimately
Nonfiction.
sorry, nonfiction. Yes, the original format was fiction, but yeah, but that was just an amazing process, and then being able to read everyone's work, and that turned into scholarship, and it's a really cool piece that we put together. So definitely go to conferences, talk to people, even if it's scary, talk about your work. There's way more people than you realize interested in what you're doing and collaborating.
Yeah. Oh, are we talking about imposter syndrome already? Yeah, it's real. Raise your hand if you've never had imposter syndrome. Yeah, we all feel imposter syndrome. The thing that I think is important about speaking about imposter syndrome is how important it is to recognize how sneaky this is and how it gets into you in all these different ways that are here in this kind of picture. You feel guilty if you don't please everyone. You feel pressure to do it by yourself. You feel like you should know everything that you need to know. And the fact that you don't is some kind of a deep moral, personal failing on your part. And it's just not. I really suffer from the perfectionist. Like, I think how things need to be done needs to be in this order. And if it's not, I get very stressed. These things affect all of us. So if you'll move ahead, advance the slide, you'll notice that you have to notice when those thoughts hit you and say, it's normal, but it's not nice of me to talk about myself that way. It's not kind of me to have that expectation for myself. Essentially, do a little cognitive behavioral therapy for yourself and reframe those negative thoughts so that you're not kicking yourself for something that everybody has. It's helpful to share those thoughts with other people so that they can help you be like, oh my God, me too, which helps to normalize it. And then, sometimes it's better to stay off social media where people are posting all of their really cool stuff that they've just done. Sometimes it's good to take a little minute from that because it can make you feel like you're always falling behind the 8 ball when you only look through a distorted lens at other people's success. Also, you don't have to publish in the New England Journal in order to have a great and fulfilling medical career.
I love that define success for yourself. That is great. I was just talking about that with some of my friends. Like, success is individual. Everybody has a different definition of it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, some people want to be dean. More power to people who want to be dean. Also, I just love this graphic about the way that you think, about the way you fit into the knowledge around you, and the way you actually fit into the knowledge around you. Like, we tend to think that other people have this great corpus of knowledge because we only hear them talk about stuff they know about. Most of us are not politicians, and we don't claim to know everything about everything all the time. So we talk when we know what we're talking about. So we sound really knowledgeable, but that doesn't mean we know everything. So keep it in context. Yes, self-compassion. Some comments you can say to reframe the feelings that you frequently have. And trust me, this never goes away. Maya Angelou has published 11 books and still feels imposter syndrome every time she sends something to her publisher. Well, if that doesn't do it for you, everyone has an imposter syndrome. We all do, and it's okay. It's normal.
That's amazing. Thank you, everyone. Like, just wondering if anybody has any final thoughts, or are there any questions by our participants?
Yeah, if any of the participants have questions, they can either raise their hand and we can unmute you, or obviously type it in the chat box and we'll try our best to answer.
Then what did you think about some of this? Could
Oh,
you
no,
have used some of these tips?
No. I absolutely relate to so many of the things that you guys brought up. One thing which I have learned interestingly was a tidbit that someone had taught me when I was in residency is that to the point that you mentioned that there might not be people in your division, but there are people around your institution who might be working on MedEd. So what they taught me, and this is a very helpful tip, getting in touch with your librarian, like the health sciences library, and having them send like a monthly feed to you of people who are publishing in MedEd. And I found people who are doing work in EM at my institution, pediatrics, and it's people in academia love talking about themselves for the most part. So it's always a nice way to kind of connect with them. And then they're always up for giving suggestions and tips.
That was a
While
great
we
one.
while we wait for some of the other questions, I did have one question in mind. I think many of us, not all, but many of us are like, guilty of falling into the trap where we implement a curriculum and then retrospectively say that, hey, this might be something we could have published. So I wonder if any of you have thoughts on like, how to start off with like, a good sort of maybe a conceptual or a framework sort of thing in mind in order to like plan our curriculum that way so that if we end up deciding to publish, it doesn't, it comes across with a little more rigor and a little more thought and intentionality.
Then that's a great question. You use a couple buzzwords, but I don't think we have enough time to get into in terms of theoretical framework and conceptual frameworks. But I think anytime that you are asked to do something, teach something, develop a curricula, take a new role on, which has a large educational component, you should sit down before you even get to thinking about what are all the steps to make that project happen. And again, kind of ask yourself those questions. Is the work that I'm doing something that would provide value to other institutions if I shared it? And then two, just going back, what would a meaningful outcome look like, right? So you can try to match your evaluation, your tools to start with. Certainly, we don't have enough time for this, but thinking about your theoretical framework, which is what is the theory in the education science that describes why your intervention you expect it to work, right? So deliberate practice for something like simulation-based mastery learning. Um, and then your conceptual framework is where, one is your GPS, your theoretical framework, and your conceptual framework is your how and the actual route on your map to get somewhere. Having those in mind definitely increases the rigor of your project, but I think it's all about carving out some intentional time, and it's hard with how fast-paced our lives are and how quick sometimes the turnarounds are to just think about how do I min max, right? So what is kind of the minimum amount of things that I can assess or check for in a smart way that answers my question, that proves there's a benefit, and then working on implementing that. And like Erin talked about, that's also, I think, a place where you get a mentor or somebody else involved to kind of stress test what you're thinking. And doesn't have to take a long time. I know that sounds daunting, but that can actually be a very quick process.
And probably save time down the line, so it's worth it in the beginning.
Or save you from kicking yourself in the butt, right, later on when you're like, oh, this was like an amazing project and it seems like it's had an amazing impact on my learners. I wish I had studied it in a way that I could publish and share this um, nationally.
I just want to quickly take the question about the website. So type in ATSSOME section on medical education, and there will be a menu that pops down the side that talks through the SOME and how it works. There's one that's labeled links right on the front page of SOME. And if you click on MedEd links, you'll get a ton of stuff about like community and resources and learning materials and all kinds of things that you might find valuable. So sorry to put a website on the screen and then immediately walk away from the link.
Well, there's Ashley was asking, okay, which slide was that?
It might have been the one that Erin was talking about, as well as the one that you had, Rodolfo, with like the links to all the webinars.
Oh, yes.
Ashley Henderson, does that answer that question?
Awesome.
Great. All right. Thank you guys so much for doing this. Thank you for entertaining my and coming to teach me about this and everybody else. I hope that everybody got something out of it and that is helpful. Please feel free to recommend it to your friends on a podcast later. But yeah, I think that with that we'll finish. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Do you have enough mentors? If you don't, maybe you need another mentor.